good to go. Anytime you're ready.
Okay, thank you. So let me call the meeting of the Other Post-Employment Benefits Trustees Committee meeting to order. It is 3:05 p.m. And this meeting is being recorded and will be posted. So with that, Val, do you want to take the roll call?
Yes. Fred McGregor.
Present.
Gordon Salas.
Present.
Mark Mathers.
Present. And so I am happy to report we have a brand new trustee, Fran McGregor. Her appointment was approved by the board just this Tuesday. So congratulations, Fran.
Thank you.
This is the silent clapping going on. Would you like to, give a short, history of your experience with the district and so forth?
Well, I just retired last summer because of COVID. I had taught in this district for 29 years, but I had taught 13 years previously out of state. I was at Brown Elementary for 17 years. I was at Shaw Middle School for a year, and then the rest of my career was at DePaul Middle School. And here I am retired, a little earlier than I thought, but I'm anxious to get started in some new adventures here.
That's great. I wouldn't call the OPEB Trust Committee an adventure of any kind, but I mean, if you do, then that's fine.
We'll find out.
That's right. We will. We will. All right. Very good. Welcome, Fran. Really appreciate your service to the district and to this committee.
Thank you.
So I will ask Val, about public comment, agenda item 1.03. We didn't receive any public comment, but I'll just check with Val to see if we got any in the last few minutes.
No public comment.
Okay, very good. Agenda item 1.04 then is action to adopt the agenda.
I move that. You waiting for someone to make that motion? Okay.
I am, Gordon.
And I'll make motion that we approve the point that you were making, and it slipped my mind already. To accept the agenda.
To adopt the agenda?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
I second that.
Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes unanimously. And I hate to be so bureaucratic, but just for the record, for the minutes, if you can announce your name before you make a motion or second, that's just helpful for later when we make the minutes.
Okay.
All right, so moving on to agenda item 2.01. That is for approval of the minutes of the October 28th, 2020 meeting. Fran, you can either choose to abstain or vote for. You are allowed to vote for the minutes if you choose to. So do I have a motion? Well, let me ask, are there any changes to the minutes that are part of your packet? Okay, hearing none, do I have a... Yep, go ahead, Gordon.
No changes.
Okay, so do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Gordon Salas, I make a motion that we approve the minutes of the last meeting.
Very good. I'll second that motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions?
Aye. Here, Fran.
Okay.
Fran
Okay,
McGregor.
very good. Very good. Motion passes 2-0-1. 2 ayes and 1 abstention. Okay then, getting back to the agenda. So I should have said at the onset there, but you heard, there is another committee meeting at 4 o'clock. So I think we want to try it at all possible to contain this meeting to less than an hour. So let me put that out there for you all. We don't have many agenda items, so I think we can accomplish that pretty easily. But the next agenda item is for information and discussion only. And and that is 2.02. And this is an orientation for our new trustees, and I put both of you in that category. Gordon was gracious enough to join the committee without a really full orientation. So I thought it would really be beneficial to go through the presentation materials in your packet to explain to you what is the role of the OPEB trust and, kind of the do's and don'ts as well. So let me try to share my screen. And this is always a challenge. Right. So I'm going to ask anyone if they can see the presentation deck titled Orientation for New Trustees of Other Post-Employment Benefits Trusts.
Yes.
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 Okay, very good. So again, the concept here is for the first time ever, we would, we have this orientation document for you that hopefully you can use as a reference document to explain kind of, again, what does this committee actually do? What are the powers of the committee? What is within your discretion, kind of what isn't. So first on slide 2, we provided the legal citations here. In Nevada revised statutes, there is the explicit authority to form an OPEB trust. Any local government can set up such a trust for retirement benefits other than a pension, which of course is covered by the Nevada PERS system. And so retirement benefits are defined as any benefits other than a pension, to include life insurance, accident insurance, or health insurance, or any combination of such benefits. Importantly, all contributions into this trust are irrevocable and become a property of the beneficiaries of the trust, i.e. eligible retirees. So there is no legal ability for the school district, if times were tough, or even in a bankruptcy situation, and we actually technically in Nevada don't have the ability to declare bankruptcy, but if we became insolvent in that kind of ultimate worst case scenario, the district still cannot access the assets within the trust legally. So that's important, right? That's why it's called a trust. And it has, as of course, a separate board of trustees, which you are on, to manage that trust. So the functions of the trust are pretty straightforward, and they're not many. First, the trust is to receive and hold any contributions made by Washoe County School District into the trust. So we got a kind of cash flow diagram for you that you probably saw, but the district can make a decision to budget for contributions into the trust. It could make a decision not to budget any contributions into the trust in a particular year, and that is the district's decision. That is the district board of trustees decision. But if it makes the decision to budget and then transfer any monies into the trust, then again, the OPEB trust would hold those contributions for future payments to eligible retirees. While it's holding those assets, the trust has complete investment authority within the parameters of the relevant statutes to invest those monies. And really, there are two main approaches allowed in law that we can take to invest monies. One is through a special investment vehicle managed by Nevada PERS, and that is the Retirement Benefits Investment Fund, which we can talk about in a little bit. That's a special account managed by the Nevada PERS staff with its own board that manages our trust as well as other OPEB trusts in the state. So Washoe County has an OPEB trust, we have an OPEB trust, and so forth. And so those are commingled and managed as one entity. And then of course we get our proportionate share of distributions, i.e. interest out of that fund. The trust could choose to get out of the Retirement Benefits Investment Fund, or RBIF, and separately manage those assets, which we can talk about in a little bit. But that would need to be done through a professional fund manager. So it wouldn't be like we would be making any investment decisions ourselves. So it would need to be professionally managed. A third function then of the trust is to approve requests for reimbursement of retirement benefit costs, i.e. OPEB costs, that are presented by the school district staff, which is usually Robbie Carson, who's on this call. And so if it's in the proper format, the OPEB trust must approve the request. Certainly can ask questions to understand better, the dollar amount or what have you. And then the trust can commission and receive an annual audit of its funds. And so that's something we do annually. In between all those activities, you will get financial statements prepared by district financial staff. And Robbie, usually presents those so you can see what's going on quarterly and at the end of the fiscal year. So you will get a number of reports from us. And there's, the IRS form we have to sign as by virtue of being a trust and so forth. But those really are the four main purposes of the trust. So Gordon or Fran, do you have any questions about that?
Not yet.
No,
Okay.
I do not.
Okay,
I don't
and then the
have
next, okay. Then the next slide 4, covers the kind of retirement benefits offered by the district. You know these well, I'm sure. The district provides a subsidy of medical insurance or health insurance premiums for eligible retirees. And back a number of years ago, the district did kind of draw down the drawbridge. Not every retiree is eligible to receive benefits. And so there are requirements, qualifications for retirees. You can see when that drawbridge was closed, and our costs of that subsidy is capped based on a formula that was negotiated with employees associations. A second retirement benefit are subsidies for retirees who were able to choose prior to November 30th of 2008 to enroll in the state's public employees benefit program, which again is health insurance. And you can see 1,100 employees or so were using this benefit. So it's just a different way to get health insurance benefits. So that's a second benefit we fund and cover typically. And then lastly is our life insurance plan, where retirees pay 100% of the premiums, but there's what's called in accounting lingo an implicit subsidy there. So if retirees got their own life insurance policy, they probably pay a higher premium than active employees. But state law requires that the cost of active and retired employees be blended. So there is an implicit subsidy. You're getting kind of a lower rate by virtue of blending rates for active and retired employees. Slide 5, again, kind of graphically just goes into what we talked about in the orange little oval. The district contributes monies to the trust fund. They go into the trust fund that's locked, it's in a lockbox. District cannot access those monies. And then if it is presented a request for reimbursement by the district, then it would approve such a request. And so the money would come out. So it's going to come in obviously from district contributions as well as investment earnings. And so in the middle part of the graph, obviously that's where we're investing funds with RBIF. And then obviously it comes out as a disbursement if the county requests reimbursement, or if the school district requests reimbursement. Pretty simple. Wanted to talk real quickly about different approaches to funding OPEB. So now we're kind of getting in the nitty gritty. As we'll talk about, the district's consultants, actuarial consultants, will prepare a report, an actuarial report that of our OPEB costs. And in that calculation, or in that report, there will be a calculation of what we should fund on an annual basis to completely cover distributions. It's a complex calculation for sure. And we'll talk about it, but I believe our annual requirement is something in the neighborhood of $14 million. And so if the district wanted to fully fund all of our OPEB costs up front, then annual contribution would be in that neighborhood of $14 million. That's a lot of money.
Yes.
Another approach or non-approach, if you will, is there is no legal requirement for local governments to have an OPEB trust at all. And most governments do not. They do not fund OPEB costs through the OPEB trust. They don't make contributions into an OPEB trust at all. And so they are going to pay for retirees' costs on a cash basis. It would be paid, if the district chose that, it would be paid straight out of the health insurance fund. And so the health insurance rates that would be calculated would include retirees' costs, and the district would fund it essentially that way on a pay-as-you-go or cash basis, and provide that subsidy that way. And then there's kind of what we call a hybrid approach, where the district can choose to make some contributions to trust, but they're not as high as 14 million to fully fund the OPEB costs up front, and they can draw down on the trust. And the key question is there is, well, how sustainable is that? Because obviously, if what we're drawing down is more than what we've invested, we're gonna drain that trust over time, right? So if we're only contributing 2 million a year, but drawing out 5 million a year, obviously that's not sustainable, right? And so we would draw down on the balance within the OPEB trust. Perfectly legal, just not fiscally sustainable. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So it is a balancing act on slide 7, as you can see. It would be nice, of course, to fully fund OPEB contributions, and you can see here it is 13.8 million, but the district has a budget, and you all know how challenging the district's budget can be given the level of funding from the state. So if we chose to fund more contributions, if we had the wherewithal to do that, that certainly would reduce our OPEB liability. But most agencies, again, don't have the financial wherewithal to do that. So when our funding contributions go down, the OPEB liability goes up. We're kind of a seesaw there. If that makes sense. Hopefully it makes sense.
It does.
So why are OPEB trusts formed, and what good are they if ultimately the district's on the hook for those costs? And this graph tries to show you that. The blue line is just an example of what an agency's contributions would be if they chose to fund these costs on a pay-as-you-go cash basis. And then the dashed red line is what those contributions would need to be if you were to pre-fund OPEB contributions. And so normally, kind of in the lifespan of these OPEB trusts, if you fund contributions on a pay-as-you-go basis, your requirement is pretty low initially, right? There's not that many retirees, but then as those active employees retire, that level of funding required to cover those costs keeps going up and up and up. The benefit of pre-funding OPEB contributions is you may start at a higher point, as you can see. That red dashed line is higher than the blue line. But then over time, you've got those investments as you fund it working for you, right? They're generating interest income that help cover those costs. And so where you end up on an annual basis is you'll have to make smaller contributions later than you would under a pay-as-you-go kind of regime. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So that's why the district in Washoe County, and I think Tumwa, among Northern Nevada entities, have chosen to pre-fund at least some of their OPEB contributions again, to have that money work for them, like any kind of savings account would, right? You're saving today for a future cost tomorrow. But there are many agencies that do not do this, again, just because their budgets are stretched. So what are our actual costs of the OPEB plan? Slide 9 gives those. As of June 30th, our total OPEB liability was $256 million. Obviously a large number. There are other agencies like the county with an even larger number. So again, we have kind of a closed system. We've shut down eligibility, and we're also capping benefits. The county doesn't actually cap benefits. So if you have 20 years of experience and you came in before 1998, your 100% of your health insurance premium is paid for the rest of your life. So there's no cap on that cost. So they have significant costs. So each entity has their own separate, right, benefits formula and benefits period that depends on, you know, the negotiations with employees associations. We have roughly $59 million in the bank, or, you know, basically with RBIF. So our net OPEB liability is 197 million as of June 30th. So our funding ratio is 23%. We have 23% of our ultimate costs funded. And you can see that has gone down. That actuarial calculations based on many different actuarial assumptions, and most systems like PERS and OPEB entities have seen their liability go up as people live longer, right? And so forth. So we're not unusual in seeing kind of a spike in our liability. You can see it's increased significantly just over the last, since June 30th of 18. That's actually not that unusual. You know, important concept that and we provided a document was the fiduciary principles that fall on trustees. I'll go pretty quickly because again, I know we got to get done by 4 o'clock. But there are 2 main fiduciary principles that a fiduciary needs to adhere to, and your fiduciary duties are spelled out in NRS 287. So you need to act in a fiduciary capacity. But then the question is, what does that mean, Mark? Well, first, there's a duty of loyalty, and that just means simply you can only serve one master. So how that would be violated is kind of difficult for you to do, even if you wanted to, and I know you don't want to, but it would be like you're now an employee of Morgan Stanley, and Morgan Stanley is our investment manager, and you would vote to do something that would benefit Morgan Stanley and not benefit the OPEB trust. Basically, you need to have a conflict of interest to violate this duty of loyalty. And I don't think you have one, and I don't think we put you in a position, even if you did work for Morgan Stanley or another financial shop, to benefit, right? But if we got out of RBIF and used a professional money manager and you had some relationship with that money manager, and then you voted again to support or benefit that investment manager, that would be a violation of duty of loyalty. And then there's a second duty, a duty of care or prudence. And we have documents later in the packet that hopefully you've read or will read. And basically, what this gets to is when you have to make, for instance, investment decisions or any decisions, that you have followed a careful and thorough process to reach those decisions. And so if we chose not to be in RBIF and separately manage investments, there would need to be a process for how to decide upon an asset allocation, right? Or a process for what mutual funds we might want to be invested in. As long as there's a very thorough, methodical, analytical process to reach those decisions, you would meet your fiduciary duties and you would be protected. If for some reason the fund lost money and then got sued, if you can demonstrate you followed an actual process versus making investment decisions willy-nilly, then you're protected. If you just, if we all got together and said, I think real estate right now is a great investment, and didn't follow a process and threw all of our money in real estate and then we took a bath, that would be a violation of procedural prudence. So I know these are theoretical right now, but it's important, I think, to talk about fiduciary concepts because it's a term we use a lot. Everyone throws around I've got a fiduciary duty or what have you. And very few times do I see that explained. So we wanted to do that here. So again, we have our monies with the Retirement Benefits Trust, Investment Trust, which is managed by Nevada PERS. Slide 11 shows you their total value of investments, 603 million or so. And again, we have about 10% of that. And it shows you how those monies are invested. We go through this virtually every quarter just to look at their performance and how they've allocated monies. And so you can see 50% or so is invested in the S&P 500 index, i.e., which is large cap stocks. Another 21.5% is invested in global stocks, foreign stocks, but in developed countries, i.e., mostly Europe, a little bit of Australia, and so forth. And then 28% of monies are invested in U.S. bonds, i.e. U.S. treasuries. These are passively invested funds, not actively managed, so the expense ratios on these funds are incredibly low. And that's the way Nevada PERS operates. They believe in a passive investment strategy where they're simply replicating the components of the S&P 500 index. So if Apple is 10% of the S&P 500 index, we would own, Apple in the same proportion. So you can see here returns on a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10-year basis. We've seen a nice bull market in the stock market for a while now, which probably means a bear market's coming. And that would be, right, just to point out an investment decision a OPEB trust could make. Wow, I think the stock market's really spiking, and I think there's going to be a bull market or correction. I want to get out of stocks. At least in theory, an OPEB trust could make those kind of decisions. But again, they have to use a professional investment manager to help them with that. And then the last slide is just a glossary of terms, unfortunately, that you'll see us use sometime. Used a couple already, but this is just, again, hopefully a reference document you can look at from time to time when we talk about these things. But by all means, if you have questions, we are happy to answer them. So really, that's our orientation for you to, again, explain what these trusts are all about, what the powers of the trust are, and the role of the trust is. So Gordon and Fran, hope that helped. If you have any questions, you could ask them now. Certainly you could ask them later too.
This is Fran. You mentioned that the district had, kind of put down a gate as to those people that would qualify for the
Yes.
trust. And what was that?
Yes. That is shown on slide 4. So you can see when the district negotiated an end to these benefits for each group. And it did vary. Classified were closed down in 1999. Certified employees hired after August 31 of 06 are not eligible. And admin employees hired after June 30th of 06 are not eligible to receive benefits. So that's what I mean when it's a closed system, right? The drawbridge was closed. Anyone hired after those dates is not eligible to receive OPEB benefits.
So anyone hired before those dates are eligible?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I'm looking to Robbie in case I misspeak, but yes, generally, I'll say it that way.
I think you're right, Mark. Sorry. This is Robbie Carson for the record. I think you're right on that one. They're just not eligible for the subsidy of the medical insurance premiums if they were hired after those dates.
And that every public agency has kind of done this that I'm familiar with. I shouldn't say every. There may be a few agencies that haven't, like I think maybe Truckee Meadows Fire Protection District, but the vast majority of agencies have had to do this because of difficult, financial times.
This is Gordon Salas. I agree with Robbie and Mark, your assessment here, because I came on to the district just after this went into effect, and I was not going to be eligible for these retiree benefits once I left the district, was my understanding.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, I have more than a question, maybe a statement. You were talking about the fiduciary responsibilities, and ironically, I am no longer going to be using the Washoe County School District's insurance for my health care because I'm going on to Medicare and I'm using a different carrier. I don't know that that will make me eligible to be on this committee anymore. Now, according to Jackie James, I cannot be on the insurance committee after February 1st because that's when I go on to Medicare. So, Mark, I don't know if there's how to find out whether I can be on this committee or if I have to relinquish my position on this committee as well.
Yeah. Gordon, thank you for raising this. You are in one of the two slots now. Fran is in the other of beneficiaries of the plan. I didn't really go into who can sit on an OPEB trust, but that is one of the eligibility criteria. Now, if you still procure a life insurance policy through the district, then I do believe you would remain qualified to sit on this trust committee. We can certainly check with legal, but since that's an OPEB benefit, that if you have a life insurance policy through the district, then I do believe you would still qualify to be on the committee.
Okay, at this time, I do not have one of those policies.
Okay. And so you're going on the Medicare plan when?
Begins February 1st. This was new to me, and it struck me in the middle of the night of all things a few weeks ago. Well, wait a minute, I'm on the insurance committee, and I don't know that I can be. So I reached out to Jackie and finally was told earlier this week, well, then I cannot be on the insurance committee.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you saying something. This is likely your last OPEB trust meeting as a trustee then.
It never even crossed my mind when I was asked to be on this committee that this would become an issue. But unfortunately, it appears to be.
Yeah. Well, that's okay. I mean, we really appreciate your service, Gordon. I mean, you definitely helped us out. And appreciate it. And thanks for raising this point.
You're welcome.
This is Fran. I'll be going on Medicare March 1st, but I have maintained my health insurance or my life insurance with the district.
Okay.
Yeah. One meeting gone.
Poor Mark.
That's it. Okay, good. Good. Otherwise, you would have had the shortest tenure of any OPEB trustee.
You had to beat
one
Gordon.
meeting. All right. Well, again, thank you. So unless there's any other questions, I think we're ready to move on to item 2.03, which is another orientation. And this has to do with open meeting law. And so again, we were getting together talking about orientation, and I think Rob Lewin, our controller, had mentioned, hey, do we explain open meeting law to our trustees? And I don't think we have. So on page 17 of your packet on the screen, we have a brief memo from the Office of General Counsel here at the district explaining some of the restrictions that you as a public body have. There was a 117-page document that I didn't include if you really wanted to get into it.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. But basically, I don't think this is news to anyone who's ever followed a Board of Trustees meeting. First, we go over what a quorum is. And for this trust, it is on Tuesday, we expanded the trust to 5 members, which means 3 members are a quorum. And so now we've got to find a replacement for Gordon real fast, but that's okay. So we need 3 members to attend to have a quorum. And then we would need 2 out of the 3 members to vote yes to pass any action item. So I know that's a little tricky, and that's explained at the bottom of page 17 of your packet. Some of the do's and don'ts that we get into on page 18 of the packet, 19, is that first, you cannot direct staff to take any action. So the committee as a whole would need to approve an action item, but you cannot say to Robbie or Rob, hey, I want you to do this. Go do this analysis for me. You cannot do that. Any action of the committee has to be properly agendized, and you are contained to that agenda item. And this is on page 19. So basically, we've got in all caps, stick to the agenda. This is faithfully enforced by our Office of General Counsel. So they sometimes will tell the board, you can't talk about that. That wasn't specified in the agenda item. And then the board has to be quiet about it and wait for the next agenda where it could be agendized. So that's important. I don't think a problem here. In terms of communication outside of our board meetings, it is prohibited for a quorum of this committee to converse or deliberate on OPEB issues outside of committee meetings. So in this case, 3, 4, 5 of us couldn't get together outside of a committee meeting to make decisions, to talk about decisions, basically to deliberate. So that's part of the reason why we're trying to expand the committee, so that if you had basically a very trivial issue or question, we can talk to you. Right now, we really can't. So we rely upon Val or Robbie or Rob to communicate meeting dates and so forth. We also cannot engage in what's called serial communication, or I go to Fran and ask you how you're going to vote on something, and then I go to Gordon and ask him how he's going to vote on something to get around that restriction. So that's absolutely prohibited. And I know we wouldn't do that. But you know, those are the main points here in terms of open meeting law. Again, it has to be properly agendized. There are no substantial communications, substantive communications by a quorum of the committee outside the committee. We did talk about conflict of interest before. If you ever feel like you have a conflict of interest, and we can talk about this more in another meeting, then certainly you can raise that to Val or Robbie. They can consult with our general counsel and get back to you. If you ever feel like you might be in that situation, you can take actions that incidentally benefit you. It's really has to be a very specific situation where you're voting on something where you're directly benefiting and you alone are kind of specifically benefiting from an action. I can't even come up with a situation where that would occur here, but we can talk about that more if you'd like later, because I know we are coming up against 4 o'clock. So any questions? Okay. Pages 20 and 21, just to explain, there's a little bit bigger write-up on fiduciary duties, but not so bad, page and a half. And then pages 22 to 25 of your packet are excerpts of Nevada revised statutes and then the Nevada Administrative Code, which are state regulations that govern operations of the trust, in case you ever want to look at that. But staff, including myself, are pretty familiar with that. And obviously we make sure we're within the bounds of NRS and state regulations. So with that completes agenda item 2.03, and we can move to agenda item 2.04, which is presentation and discussion of the OPEB Trust Fund first quarter financial statements. This is again for information discussion only. No action item here is necessary. And I will turn it over to Robbie Carson, our assistant controller, to walk you through that. And that is on page 26. I'll just keep flashing this up on the screen, Robbie, if you're okay with that.
That works perfectly. Thanks, Mark. For the record, this is Robbie Carson. The first page that we're looking at is a summary of changes to the Washoe County School District's RBIF account. And in September, there wasn't a whole lot of action in there. You can see the net assets beginning of the period was $68.9 million. And then the net assets at the end of the period were $67.2 million. So we ended up with about a $1.7 million loss just in that month. And it was all attributed to a loss in the unrealized gain, or the unrealized loss, sorry. There was a $1.8 million unrealized loss, and that's just due to changes in the market and how we have things invested. On the that should be FY21 year to date. I thought I grabbed all of those. You can see the net assets at the beginning of the period, and that's as of 7/1/2020. It was just over $60 million. But at the end of the period, so July 1 through 9/30, we're up to $67 million. So we've had a $7 million gain since the beginning of the fiscal year. Sorry, some of the highlights on there. You just flip back just real quick, Mark. That's okay. Some of the highlights on there, we had a $1.1 million realized gain over the period year to date. The $2 million change in unrealized appreciation. So we ended up with a net $2 million gain in that. And then we also had a $3.5 million deposit that was reinvested in the fund for the action of not reimbursing the district for the retiree health costs in FY20. So that's how we got to the $67 million at the end of the first quarter. If we have any questions on that one, I can answer those real quick. All right. So the next statement is just the comparative statement of net position for the trust fund as of September 30th for FY20 or FY21 and FY20. We have total assets in FY21 of the $67 million, and that's all cash and the investments in RBIF. Versus September 30th in fiscal year 2020, we had $59.5 million. So that's the $7 million gain that we've had year over year. It's been nice to see the fund balance go up instead of continue to fall. So that one's pretty boring because all we really have are assets in that one. So this one is a statement of revenues, expenditures, and change in fund balance. And this just shows all the activity in the fund through the first quarter, year over year. And it's got the budgeted amounts and the variance to the final budget. The main highlights on this one, from FY21 to FY20, there were much higher realized and unrealized gains year over year. The earnings on investments, which are the dividend earnings and interest income, those stayed fairly steady. We just had a really big rise in realized gain and unrealized gain because of the performance of the stock market. And then the difference in the expenditures, you'll see in the current fiscal year, we only have $13,000 of expenses, versus, $850,000 last year, because we're not we're not paying for the PEB subsidy directly out of the trust fund this year. The district decided to pay it out of the health insurance fund. So there won't be as many expenses going throughout the year. If it's decided to reimburse the district for those costs, then you'll see it at the end of the year. And at the bottom, you'll see there's a change in net position of $3.5 million, year to date, which gives a $67.2 $8.5 million net position at the end of the period. So, are there any questions on either of those two statements? Okay. So I think this is the last agenda item, Mark.
Yeah, sorry. So if there are no questions, we'll go to the agenda item 2.05, which is just the quarterly Nevada PERS retirement benefits investment fund report. And this is again is for the quarter ending September 30th of 20. So there it is.
And so sorry, this is Robbie Carson for the record again. In Mark's presentation, he gave you the kind of a brief view on this and the breakdown of how they're trying to allocate all the assets in the RBIF fund. That was as of June 30th, 2020, and this one's as of September 30th. So as you can see, the target allocation didn't change. The actual allocation is pretty close to where they want it to be. The earnings on the US stocks and the S&P 500 index, they're giving good returns, 8.9% fiscal year to date. The international stocks bounced back a bunch from the last quarter that we went through. These ones are positive versus the last quarter we looked at. They ended up negative by, I think it was negative 4.8% on the return. The big difference is the bond index. The returns went from 10% down to 0.1% on the fiscal year to date. So all of those gave the RBIF fund, just under 6% return. And I can answer any questions on that one.
Okay, I don't have any questions.
Gordon Salas, for the record, I have no questions.
Okay.
And McGregor, no questions.
Okay, thanks, Fran. Okay, so we are at the end of the agenda. Item 3.01 is public comment. So I'll check in with Val. Have we received any public comment, Val? Val, you're muted.
No public comment.
Okay. So item 3.02 is announcement of next meeting. I think we have some work to do since Gordon is going to unfortunately have to leave our committee. Again, Gordon, I really do appreciate your service. You helped us out in a jam and I appreciate it.
You're certainly welcome, Mark. I am sorry that it's come to this, but it's not such a terrible thing. I know you'll find a capable individual to do good work for you.
Well, thank you. And congratulations to you, I think, going on Medicare. I don't know much about Medicare yet. So hopefully it's
I
a good
don't
plan.
either.
Okay. All right. So we need to work on filling some slots before we really can schedule another meeting. So we can move past item 3.02. And so item 3.03 is adjournment of the meeting. Since we went in order, I don't have to take a vote for that.